Imagine a landmass larger than China, the United States, and Canada combined. A region stretching over 3,000 miles, rich with oil, gas, diamonds, and gold. Now imagine that this territorial immensity houses fewer people than the city of São Paulo. This is the paradox of Eastern Russia, a geographic giant that is, simultaneously, a bewildering demographic void. You might be thinking, well, obviously, the Siberian cold is merciless. But the truth is far more complex and fascinating than any thermometer can explain. Behind this nearly deserted vastness lie centuries of controversial political decisions, grandiose projects that failed spectacularly, and geopolitical tensions that still keep Russian strategists awake at night. This is not just the story of a frozen land. It's the narrative of broken promises, historical scars that still bleed, and a silent tension that could redefine the global balance of power. Prepare to discover why the planet's largest territory remains one of its greatest mysteries. In 1891, Tsar Alexander III declared the beginning of what would become one of humanity's most ambitious engineering projects, the Trans-Siberian Railway. This iron snake would slither across 6,000 miles of wilderness, connecting Moscow to Vladivostok and opening the gates of the east to Russian civilization. The vision was breathtaking. Government officials dreamed of waves of settlers following the railway tracks, establishing thriving communities along the route. They imagined a demographic revolution that would transform Siberia from a frozen wasteland into the backbone of a truly transcontinental empire. The railway would be more than steel and steam, it would be the circulatory system pumping Russian blood into the veins of the Far East. But dreams and reality rarely shake hands in Siberia. The brutal truth emerged quickly: building the railway was just the first challenge. The climate didn't just discourage settlement, it actively fought against it. Temperatures that could freeze human breath, supply lines stretching impossible distances, and isolation so complete that even the bravest pioneers felt swallowed by the vastness. More critically, the Tsarist government failed to create real incentives for mass migration. While they built the tracks, they forgot to build the reasons for people to stay. The railway became a highway through emptiness rather than a magnet for population. Today, the Trans-Siberian still runs, a mechanical ghost carrying sparse passengers through landscapes that remain stubbornly unpopulated. The great artery pumps, but there's precious little blood to circulate. It stands as a monument to ambitious planning and demographic failure, a reminder that infrastructure alone cannot conquer geography and human nature. And here lies the first great irony of Eastern Russia: one of the world's greatest engineering achievements couldn't solve its most fundamental problem. If the Tsars saw Siberia as a land of opportunity, the Soviets transformed it into something far darker, a vast penal colony where human suffering became the currency of industrial progress. The word Gulag sends chills down the spine for good reason. This wasn't just a prison system, it was a machine of human destruction disguised as economic development. Between the 1930s and 1950s, millions of Soviet citizens were shipped east in cattle cars, condemned to extract resources from the frozen earth with their bare hands and broken spirits. Stalin's regime looked at the endless Siberian wilderness and saw two things: untapped wealth and unlimited space for undesirable populations. Political prisoners, ethnic minorities, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens caught in the paranoia of the times were fed into this system like fuel into a furnace. Many who entered never returned, their bones becoming part of the permafrost they once dug. The psychological impact was devastating and long-lasting. Siberia became synonymous with punishment, exile, and death. Even after the Gulags were officially disbanded, the stigma remained. Who would voluntarily move to a region that had served as the Soviet Union's graveyard? The land itself seemed cursed, haunted by the ghosts of millions who had suffered there. Entire settlements rose and fell with the camps. When a Gulag closed, its support infrastructure would crumble overnight, leaving behind ghost towns dotting the landscape like tombstones. These abandoned settlements serve as grim reminders of a demographic strategy built on human misery rather than genuine development. The cruel irony is inescapable: a land blessed with extraordinary natural wealth became forever tainted by extraordinary human tragedy. The soil that could have nurtured thriving communities instead absorbed the blood and tears of the innocent, creating psychological barriers to settlement that persist decades after the last Gulag gate was locked forever. Picture this stark contrast. On one side of the world's longest border, fewer than 6 million Russians are scattered across eastern Siberia's immense territory. On the other side, over 100 million Chinese live in the 3 northeastern provinces alone. It's a demographic imbalance so dramatic it keeps Russian generals awake at night. This isn't just about numbers, it's about momentum. While Russian towns in the Far East continue to shrink, Chinese cities just across the border are booming with economic activity, infrastructure development, and growing influence. The contrast couldn't be starker, empty Russian villages watching the glow of Chinese megacities on the horizon. Moscow's greatest fear isn't a military invasion, it's something far more subtle and potentially more powerful: economic infiltration. China's Belt and Road Initiative has transformed global trade routes, and eastern Russia finds itself in an uncomfortable position. What was once a buffer zone could become a highway for Chinese economic expansion, turning Russian territory into a transit corridor for Beijing's ambitions. The resource equation adds another layer of tension. China's industrial machine has an insatiable appetite for raw materials, timber, minerals, energy, and increasingly, fresh water. Eastern Russia possesses all of these in abundance, but lacks the population and infrastructure to fully exploit them. It's a geopolitical puzzle where China has the demand and capability, while Russia has the supply but not the people. This creates a delicate dance between two giants. At the government level, Putin and Xi Jinping shake hands and sign cooperation agreements. But at the border level, Russian officials worry about the gradual, soft conquest of their territory through economic dependency and demographic pressure. The question haunting Moscow is simple yet profound: how do you maintain sovereignty over a land too empty to defend and too valuable to lose? As Chinese influence grows and Russian presence remains sparse, eastern Russia risks becoming less of a Russian heartland and more of a Chinese periphery. Eastern Russia is, quite literally, sitting on a fortune. The region holds approximately 80% of Russia's natural gas reserves, vast oil deposits, the world's largest diamond mines, significant gold reserves, and enough timber to supply global markets for decades. By any measure, this should be one of the world's most prosperous and densely populated regions. Instead, it's one of the emptiest. This paradox has a name in economics: the resource curse. When a region's wealth comes primarily from extracting raw materials from the ground, it often fails to develop the diverse economic ecosystem necessary to support large populations. Eastern Russia has fallen into this trap spectacularly. The extraction model is brutally efficient but demographically sterile. Modern mining and drilling operations require massive capital investment but relatively few workers. A single automated gas facility can generate billions in revenue while employing fewer people than a small-town shopping mall. The wealth flows out, to Moscow, to state coffers, to oligarchs' accounts, but it doesn't stick around to create the jobs, services, and opportunities that attract families and communities. This creates a vicious cycle. Without diverse economic opportunities, young people flee to Western cities. Without young people, there's no workforce to develop non-extractive industries. Without broader economic development, the region becomes even more dependent on resource extraction, perpetuating its demographic decline. The irony is maddening: a land so rich it could theoretically support millions remains so economically narrow that it can barely sustain the few who live there. The treasure beneath the permafrost has become both Eastern Russia's greatest asset and its demographic curse, generating immense wealth while simultaneously ensuring the region remains one of the planet's most magnificent wastelands.